When I was at Princeton Theological Seminary, we had a particularly beloved professor, Bruce Metzger, who was a great biblical scholar. And I remember one morning he was lecturing. We would get there, those of us who were believers, would get there early to hear him pray. Powerful man, great devoted man for Christ. But then he read the text I'm going to read, and he stepped apart from the pulpit, and I'll tell you what he said in just a moment. From the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God, and all things were made through him, and without him not anything was made that has been made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. And we have beheld his glory, the glory of the only Son from the Father. And so he stepped out from the pulpit with a lectern, and he said to all of us, preach the Word, preach the Word, preach the Word. The Word is Christ. Preach Christ. He is the one about whom all of human history revolves. And so he encouraged us to preach the Word. It strikes me this morning that we're doing all this music, which is wonderful. I don't know what happened. What happened in this hymn? Did we have different words? We had words that you didn't have. But, think about it. We could put away all of our song sheets, and we know the words. They'd come to us just with a little reminder. What is it about music that we could do 4 or 5 verses of particular songs. We could do so many songs. But if they were just on a sheet of paper as words without music, we would struggle to remember. But when we hear the tune, all those words come to us. Something about music puts words into our hearts. And something about words puts the Word into our heart. It's a reinforcing reality of the great mystery that I believe John is speaking of when he says the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. God takes on human flesh. In the Shawshank Redemption, the story of Andy Dufresne, who was he was convicted of a crime he didn't commit, but he was serving 2 back-to-back sentences in Shawshank prison. And he was miserable. So he wrote to the legislature every single week, asking them to send books and music and all of that sort of thing. And out of the blue, he was working in the warden's office one day, and out of the blue, boxes came, and they were full of just books had been dumped into these boxes and albums, and he was thrilled. He was overjoyed. And he went through and he pulled out an album of Mozart, The Marriage of Figaro. And the warden wasn't in the office at the time, so he locked the door, put the album on the record player, and then turned on the PA system into the entire prison. And so music was going out into the entire prison yard, and the prisoners would stop and look up, and they would hear this beautiful music that had come into the darkness of their life in their prison. And of course, he got in trouble, and he says that all of the hardships that he suffered for getting in all that trouble, they asked him, some of his friends asked him how it was that he survived that. How did he get through all of that torture and isolation and everything else? And he said, I had Mr. Mozart to keep me company. It's in here. That's the beauty of music. So you don't forget that there are places in the world not made out of stone, that there's something inside that they can't get to, that they can't touch. It's yours. So what music does is it puts it into our hearts and our minds, and it's untouchable. Others don't have access to it. Others cannot take it from us. It becomes something that is embedded within us. And that's why so many of these hymns are, in fact, the gospel put to music. That's why Christmas time is so special with respect to bringing to reality, bringing to life, in actual experience, what it means when we say that the Word became flesh. Think of those words. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. A little bit of theology here. That's a key passage to the whole notion of the Trinity, the whole doctrine of the Trinity. Well, how can Jesus be the Father, and how can Jesus be the Spirit all at once? And all we can say to that when our kids ask us at 12, 13, 14 years old after being in Sunday school, all we can say is, I don't know. I don't know. If it's God, I mean, if we could figure out that this was God, it probably wouldn't be God. But to come up with a doctrine of the Trinity that we can't even understand is part of the inspiration of that doctrine. When we think about it, no human being, no just regular person could die for another human being and actually pay the price for that person's sin. That only can be the one who bears the reality, the fullness of divinity. And so the story of Christ as God with us, taking on human flesh, is an essential, it is the core reality of our way of understanding the nature of God and His redemption of us. And so that's a theological side of it, but the real side of it that we experience, that is known by us, is that when that reality breaks in upon us, when somehow this whole thing of the pre-existent Word of God taking on human flesh, how is that experienced by us? Is that we know we're loved. We know somehow that we're not alone and that we are embraced by our God. There's an actual experience of a transforming experience that tells us that God really does love us. That's how it's known, and it puts a song in our hearts. And the response is that we sing, we proclaim, we declare. It becomes a moment where we become so aware of the love of God for us. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said that the gift of God in Christ is such that Christ did not give us, the gift of God is not a religion. It is not, Christ didn't bring Christianity. He brought the grace and the love of God. Christianity, he argues, is just a religion like any other. But the faith is something profoundly, palpably real. A faith that is known and experienced and that breaks in upon us and that quickens us, awakens us in ways that we never anticipate, such that when we have that spirit in our hearts and that song in our hearts, we're able to endure, we're able to persevere, we're able to continue on, we're able to try things we'd never tried before. But that demonstration of God's love for us is this profound demonstration of God coming to us, taking on human flesh, and then redeeming us, pulling us up out of the mud, That's how C.S. Lewis put it. He said, one may think of a diver, first reducing himself to nakedness, then glancing in midair, then gone with a splash, vanishing, rushing down through the green and warm water into the black and cold water, down through increasing pressure into the death-like region of ooze and slime and old decay. And then up again, back to color and light, his lungs almost bursting, till suddenly he breaks the surface again, holding in his hand the dripping, precious thing he went down to recover. He and it are both colored now that they have come up into the light. Down below, where it lay colorless in the dark, he lost his color too. And so the diver comes down and reaches into the muck and pulls us out, and we are to him like that precious pearl that is therein contained. And he takes on our coloration. He takes on our nature so that he might retrieve us and bring us to himself. That's the great reality, the truth of Christmas that is behind all of this. And we rejoice with all of the Santa Claus stuff and all the reindeer and the elves and all of that silly stuff that attends to it, because ultimately even that points beyond itself. All of those Christmas stories point beyond themselves to a reality that is ultimately this reality, that God comes to us, takes on human flesh, and that when Jesus lived and when people encountered him, they didn't know it, but they were face to face with God in the flesh. The disciples didn't get it. It took decades for them to figure this out. They didn't realize it. But when we come face to face with Christ, we see in his face the very fullness of God, who has come to us to bring us to himself. To what end? That he would embrace us, that he would love us, and that we would be so transformed by his love that we would glory in the thought of being with him for all eternity, even as the Father has great glory in that. You know, we have some kids here. They're not here this morning, Ashlyn and Anthony. These two wonderful little Forsyth kids. And I do this intentionally. After church, every Sunday morning, I give them a robe hug, because when I'm done up here, I always unbutton this robe and try to cool off a little bit. Well, the kids come running up to me, and I wrap them inside my robe and give them a hug. Why? I want them to know, not my love, which I do, I love those kids, but I want them to know the love of God. Inasmuch as I, in my paltry way, can represent God to them as a pastor, I want them to know the deep, abiding love of God. For he has come to us, Emmanuel. Will you bow with me in prayer? Oh Lord, come into our hearts, fill us, transform us, and give us a song. We ask it in the name of your Son.